There's a particular Sunday evening feeling that a lot of founders know and nobody talks about openly. It's not quite dread, it's not quite anxiety, it's somewhere between the two. It sits in the chest like something unfinished. The week is about to start, the revenue numbers from last month are still not where they should be, and somewhere between dinner and trying to sleep, a decision gets made. We need to run something, a promo, a flash sale, a push, something to force some movement before the month gets away. So Monday morning arrives and the team gets the brief. Discount goes up, ads go live, the inbox starts pinging. For 2 weeks, things feel like they're working because something is moving, and movement, even borrowed movement, feels like progress. Then the budget runs out, or the campaign ends, and the silence returns almost immediately. Traffic drops, leads dry up, the numbers settle back to roughly where they were before the whole thing started, except now there's less money in the account and a team that's already tired being asked to gear up for the next push. This is the campaign trap. And it's not a cash flow problem. It's not a strategy problem. It's a thinking problem. And it's far more expensive than the ad spend on any single campaign. Think about what happens to the body after eating a large amount of sugar at once. Energy spikes, mood lifts, everything feels faster and sharper for a window of time. Then the crash arrives and the body feels worse than it did before the sugar. Not just back to baseline, actually worse. Now the body craves more sugar to get back to the feeling it had before, which creates the spike again and the crash again, then the craving again. The cycle runs itself once you're inside it, and the longer you stay inside it, the harder it is to remember what normal felt like before the cycle started. A lot of marketing budgets run exactly on this logic. A campaign creates a spike, the spike feels like success, the campaign ends and the spike crashes. The crash feels like failure, so another campaign gets launched to recreate the spike, and the cycle repeats itself month after month, with the team getting more exhausted and the business getting no closer to building anything durable. Here's the thing nobody says clearly enough. The spike was never success. The spike was borrowed attention, and borrowed attention has to be paid back with interest every single time. The business that actually build something sustainable aren't the ones running the best campaigns. They're the ones who figured out how to stop needing campaigns in the first place. Picture two businesses starting out in the same space at the same time, both selling premium skincare to Nigerian women, both with similar budgets, similar team sizes, and similar ambitions. The first one, let's call it brand A, goes the route that feels obvious. They run paid ads aggressively, every product launch gets a campaign, every campaign runs for 2 to 4 weeks, generates revenue, then gets switched off while the team prepares the next one. They chase every trending audio on Instagram, they discount heavily during Ember months because everyone else discounts heavily during the Ember month. Their content calendar is full, their team is busy, and every month is essentially a fresh negotiation between the brand and its own audience for attention. The second one, let's call it brand B, does something that looks slower and slightly reckless from the outside. They spend their first 3 months not running ads at all. Instead, they publish one long-form piece of content every week, answering a real question their audience has about skincare. Not a listicle, not a product announcement, something genuinely useful. The kind of answer you'd send a friend who texted you asking for advice. They build a newsletter. They start a WhatsApp community, not to push products, but to host conversations about skincare routines, ingredient questions, and real skin concerns. 12 months later, brand A's revenue looks like a heartbeat monitor. Peaks and valleys, always moving, never climbing. Brand B's revenue looks like a staircase, slower to start, but each month higher than the one before, with a growing percentage coming from returning customers who came back without being asked. This gap isn't luck or budget. It's compounding versus resetting, and they produce fundamentally different businesses over time. Here's a frame that makes the campaign trap easier to see clearly. A lot of marketing budgets are essentially rent. So when you run a paid ad, you're renting space in someone's feed for the duration of your spend. The moment you stop paying, you vacate the space completely and it gets filled immediately by the next tenant. You leave nothing behind. You built nothing. The audience you reached has no particular reason to remember you now that the ad is gone, because the ad was the only reason they saw you in the first place. Renting isn't always wrong. People rent apartments for good reasons, but nobody who rents an apartment confuses it with building wealth. The landlord is building wealth. The tenant is maintaining access. There's a difference, and it matters enormously over a long enough timeline. Compounding marketing is real estate. Every piece of content built on a genuine understanding of your audience and your identity is an asset. An asset behaves differently from expenses. An expense gives you something for the duration of the payment and then nothing after. An asset keeps giving after the initial work is done. A well-written piece of content that answers a real question can rank in search for years. It gets shared in the DMs by people who found it useful. It gets saved and returned to. It converts people who discovered it 12 months after it was published with zero additional spend. It does work while the team is asleep, while the founder is on leave, or while nobody's actively thinking about marketing. The test worth running on any piece of content before it gets made: will this still be relevant to our audience in 2 years? If the honest answer is no, what's being built is not an asset. It's a more elaborate form of rent. Morning Brew is a business newsletter that grew to over 4 million subscribers and sold for roughly $75 million. The founders were 2 college students who started writing a brief, readable summary of business news and sending it to their classmates. They didn't win because of one big campaign. They didn't go viral in a way that changed everything overnight. They won because they showed up in the same inbox with the same quality at the same time every single morning until people built the newsletter into their daily routine, the way people build coffee into their morning. Habits compound in a way that campaigns simply can't. A campaign can make someone aware of you. A habit makes you a part of someone's day. Those are not the same relationship, and they don't produce the same outcomes. The brands that win over long timelines are almost always the ones that found a way to become habitual. Not necessarily daily, but regular, consistent, and reliable enough that their audience starts to anticipate the next thing rather than being interrupted by the current one. There's a Nigerian parallel worth thinking about. Think about the radio presenters or the OAPs whose shows people arrange their mornings around. Not because every episode is the best episode they've ever heard, but because the presenter has been consistent long enough to become a fixture. So when that person eventually endorses something, the endorsement carries weight that no paid placement can manufacture, because it comes from an established relationship, not a transaction. That's what compounding content builds for a brand. Not just audience, relationship, which is the only thing that actually converts with any reliability over time. This is a slightly uncomfortable thing to say, but it's important enough to say clearly. A lot of founders who get tired of the campaign trap look for someone to hand the problem to. So they hire a performance marketing agency to fix their traffic for 30 days, or a content agency to fill their calendar for a quarter, or a social media management team to keep the pages active. And the work gets done. The agency delivers what they promised. Traffic bumps, content gets published, pages stay active. The invoice, yes, gets paid. Then the contract ends or the budget gets cut and the result evaporates at roughly the same speed they appeared. This happens not because agencies are bad at their jobs. Most of them are doing exactly what they were hired to do. It happens because short-term delivery was the brief, and nobody hired them to build something that would outlast the contract. You can't outsource compounding. You can outsource campaigns, and there's a time and place for that. But if the underlying system doesn't exist, the agency is just renting the space on your behalf and charging you for the landlord's profit margin too. We ran into a version of this recently with a startup that came to us wanting content. Just content. When we sat with them to actually start, we hit the same wall almost immediately. We couldn't build content that would compound because there was no identity underneath it to give it direction. So no clear sense of who they were for, or what they wanted to be known for over time. So we stopped and did something else first. A brand document that mapped their identity, their real target audience, and the kind of community they needed to start building from day one. Not later when things picked up, but immediately. Only then did the content planning make sense, because only then did we have something to compound on. Content without identity doesn't compound. It just fills space. And filled space that doesn't mean anything is still emptiness wearing a consistent posting schedule. Marketing teams track a lot of things: reach, impressions, click-through rate, cost per acquisition, follower growth, engagement rate, and these are all real numbers, and some of them do matter. But there's a metric almost nobody tracks, and it's the only one that actually compounds: trust. Specifically, how much does our audience trust us this month than they did last month? Trust is hard to put in a spreadsheet, which is probably why it gets ignored in favor of things that are easy to put in a spreadsheet. But trust is what drives returning customers, and returning customers are the economic engine of every stable business. So think about the business you personally spend the most money with over time. Not the ones you discover through an ad, the ones you keep going back to, the ones you recommend to people without being asked, the ones you'd feel a small genuine loss about it if they shut down. Almost none of those relationships started with a campaign. They started with a consistent experience that built on itself over time. Something that showed up reliably, delivered what it promised, and earned a degree of confidence that couldn't have been manufactured quickly. That's trust working as a compounding asset. And it's the thing that makes a business genuinely hard to compete with. You can't outspend trust. You can't A/B test your way to it. You can't buy it in 30 days from an agency. You build it slowly. The same way you build any relationship, by showing up consistently, being genuinely useful, and not treating every interaction as an opportunity to extract something. The escape from short-term thinking isn't a single tactical shift. It's a structural one. It runs on three things working together. Identity is the foundation. Not what the business sells, but what it stands for, who it's genuinely for, and what someone should think about when the product isn't in front of them. Identity is what makes compounding possible in the first place, because without it, every piece of content is starting from a different place than the last one, and you can't build momentum on shifting ground. Content is the engine. Not content as a calendar to fill, but content as a library to build. The difference matters. A calendar measures activity. A library measures assets. So every piece of content added to a genuine library either answers a question the audience will still have next year, deepens their understanding of something they care about, or reinforces the identity of the brand in a way that makes the next piece easier to trust. Build enough of a library and it starts doing work completely independently of whoever is managing the posting schedule. Community is the multiplier. When identity and content are working properly, they attract people who share the belief system the brand is built on. These people eventually start talking to each other, sharing the content with their own networks, and defending the brand to others without being asked. At that point, the marketing budget does a fundamentally different job. So instead of buying all the attention from scratch, it just amplifies something that's already generating its own momentum. These three build on each other, which is the whole point. Identity makes content purposeful, content attracts the right community, and community validates and sharpens the identity. Each loop through makes the next loop more efficient, which is compounding in its most practical form. It is worth being specific about this because long-term thinking can feel abstract enough to dismiss. So picture what a business looks like when it has been compounding for 18 months consistently. A meaningful percentage of monthly revenue now comes from people who discovered the brand through a piece of content published 6 months ago or more. Content that required one investment of time and has been generating returns since. A growing portion of new customers arrive because an existing customer mentioned the brand in a conversation somewhere. The team is no longer spending the first week of every month in a panic about how to generate numbers for the month, because there's a baseline that exists independently of whatever campaign may or may not be running. The founder can take a 2-week break without the business marketing going silent because the library keeps working, the community keeps talking, and the identity keeps attracting the right people even when nobody's actively pushing. This is not a fantasy. This is what businesses that avoided the campaign trap actually looks like from the inside. Not effortless, Not overnight, but self-reinforcing in a way that gets more valuable the longer it runs. Contrast that with the alternative, where 2 weeks away from the business means 2 weeks of silence, and silence means starting the next month from roughly zero again. None of this requires a complete overhaul of everything the business is currently doing. It requires one shift in how decisions get made. So before any piece of content gets created, ask one question. Is this rent or real estate? Is this being built to generate a spike for the next 2 weeks, or is this being built to still be useful and discoverable 2 years from now? The answer changes what gets made and how it gets made. So look at the next 30 days of planned activity. Total up everything being done to generate short-term attention. The promotions, the ads, the flash sales. Now, total up everything being done to build a long-term asset. The evergreen content, the community infrastructure. The identity work. The ratio between these two numbers is a reasonably honest picture of whether the business is building real estate or paying rent. Most businesses, when they do this exercise honestly, find the ratio almost entirely weighted towards rent. That's not a failure, it's just information. And information about where you actually are is the only honest starting point for getting somewhere different. The shift doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. One piece of evergreen content per week instead of 3 rushed posts that nobody will remember. One community touch point per month that adds value instead of asking for a sale. 1 month of identity work that makes every subsequent piece of content easier to create and more consistent to receive. Small shifts in the direction of compounding held consistently over time produces outcomes that no campaign can replicate, because campaigns reset and compounding doesn't. So here's the thing about the campaign trap that makes it genuinely dangerous beyond the obvious financial cost. It's self-reinforcing in the wrong direction. Every time a business resets to zero and needs a campaign to spike back up, the team gets slightly conditioned to thinking in campaign cycles. Identity work starts to feel impractical because the results aren't immediate. Community building starts to feel like a distraction because it doesn't show up in this month's numbers. Evergreen content starts to feel like a luxury because the pressure of the current month always feels more urgent than the foundation of the next year. Meanwhile, the business next door that has been quietly compounding for 12 months now has a library of content doing work independently, a community generating word of mouth that doesn't show up as a line item on any invoice, and a level of audience trust that makes every new product launch easier than the last one. The campaign trap doesn't just waste money, it builds the wrong instincts, and instincts that have been reinforced over years are genuinely hard to replace. The business that escape it aren't the ones who found the better campaign strategy. They're the ones who decided at some specific moment to stop playing the sprint game entirely and start building something that compounds instead. That decision is available right now. The only thing it costs is the patience to let it work and the discipline not to abandon it the first time a Sunday evening comes around and the chest tightens and the instinct says to just run something. Because the something that needs running isn't a campaign. It's the system underneath. And that's it on the video today. Hope you learned a lot. And if you want to have a conversation with us, just go onto our website. It's at www.ideevalab.com. That is IDEEVA lab.com. Book a time slot and we're happy to have a conversation. See you in the next one.